Good morning and welcome to BeefLink TV, your daily dose of industry information. We recently published on our website an article about clandestines, and Robert Windsor is back this morning to give us an update. So firstly, Robert, thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure, Natalie.
So firstly, can you give us a bit of background on the work that BEFA has been doing with the RHA on this subject?
Yes, it sort of started when we began to get complaints from members who were suffering delays. Vehicles got impounded, if you like, as these clandestines were located. And obviously, there's two elements to this. The first is the penalty against the company and the driver. Now, most of our members are freight forwarders, so in a way they don't suffer necessarily the financial loss, although some members do operate their own trucks across the to the EU, so they are getting penalised. But the point we felt, which was unfair, was that one, even if you've done everything that you possibly could, and that's in line with the guidance, then there was still a penalty being incurred. And of course, then the other problem was the delay. The freight was being delayed. This led to upset clients. And in certain cases, of course, due to the nature of the goods, there was an insurance claim, and that was particularly on fresh produce, because if clandestine had broken in on fresh produce, we had a situation where the load was rejected because it could be contaminated. Insurers were not paying out on the whole load. They actually were saying, well, actually, only that part has been contaminated, and eventually some sort of compromise was reached. So we've been working on it for some time. It's one of those things. I'm so old, I can remember Songat and the Jungle, which was right back in the 80s and 90s. So it's not something that's new. It just seems to have become more intense, and there's more issues. I mean, we don't want to go into the politics of this, but of course, it was reported that there's been a record number of migrants crossing by small boats in 2025. Inevitably, if they're using small boats, they're going to be trying to break into trucks, and they're getting more and more sophisticated about this.
Absolutely. So in conjunction with the RHA, what is our call to action?
Right. Well, we put something on our website, which the RHA had drafted, and a survey. I mean, basically, we are writing to Yvette Cooper on this matter. The ICIBI, which is the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, wrote a detailed 123 page report on this matter. And basically, the problem is that although the Home Office and Border Force have accepted most of it, we feel their timeframes are too long. We're looking for them they're looking at sort of resolving the matter in 2026, but we want it done by the end of 2025, because inevitably, during the period of time, people are going to get fines. So the call to action is quite simply please have a look at what's on our website, have a read of the letter, and then just fill in the little survey, which gives you then basically, it will mean that your name will go on that letter. And this really is a case that the more names that go on that letter from either both trade association, the more likely we're going to get some sort of action.
And I know we touched on the reasons earlier on in this episode, but why do you feel personally, Robert, that this topic is so important and addressing it is so important?
Well, I think there's two aspects to it, isn't there? There's a sort of political and humanitarian, because obviously if we can disrupt it to a point where, it's no longer viable, that will maybe encourage people not to try and risk their lives by trying to find their way into the UK in this way. I think the other thing is just because of the inconvenience and cost it's putting onto trade and disrupting it. I mean, there must be a point where eventually truckers will think about actually wanting to come to the UK. And then, of course, there is the sheer inconvenience and the losses by all parties in the supply chain on this matter.
Robert, thank you for joining us this morning and for taking the time to talk us through this matter. As Robert mentions, there is an article on our website and an open letter and the surveys. We'll pop a link to those in the description below. That's all for today's episode of Beefy Link TV, your daily dose of industry information.